Hello, my bestest of peeps! Today we are having a little sit-down video here in my office and we are gonna talk about myths and misconceptions about Scotland and Edinburgh that need to be debunked. I have based some of these on what my friends tell me. You know, whenever I come back to the continent, I get a lot of people asking me stuff and I'm always like, look, sit down, let me explain. And this is basically a video version of that conversation I tend to have with my friends who have never been to Scotland. Anyway, let's get to it. So, first up, Scottish people are cheap and stingy. That's kind of a stereotype that I feel like a lot of us grew up with. I mean, think of Scrooge McDuck, right? I mean, he's Scottish and he's pretty stingy and lovable. So it's not like a super bad thing per se, but I don't really understand where it even came from. I mean, now I understand a little bit more than I did before I actually delved into a bit of a research on this topic. Apparently one of the theories of how this could have become a stereotype about Scottish people is when English people and English banks noticed that Scottish people didn't trust English banks with their money, which kind of gave them this no, I'm keeping all my money for myself, no thank you, attitude. So that would be quite an interesting explanation. A related fun fact is that apparently Scotch tape was named Scotch tape because the glue was only on the sides and not running through the middle of it. So, you know, it was cheaper to produce than other adhesive tapes. And I never heard that before. I think that's really interesting and funny. But let me just get to the debunking. I definitely cannot say that I've ever noticed that Scottish people would be any different with their money than any other nations I've ever met in my life. I guess that the only time any sort of thriftiness comes up is when people talk about how Scotland is the best place for thrift shopping. So there you go. Next up, Scottish cuisine is all fried and unhealthy. So down in England they have the whole meat to veg sort of thing and they're not very famous for it either. And over here we just apparently fry everything. And I remember that when I first moved here, some of the locals did warn me that I better not be expecting any vegetables on my plate, or any fresh vegetables at least, and that I better really like fried food. And don't get me wrong, there is definitely a part of the food culture here that does love deep frying things, because, you know, we have our chippies, we love our chippies. We have a deep fried pizza, which I never tried, but it is definitely a thing. And of course, the deep fried Mars bar, which by the way, locals don't really eat, but I feel like it is kind of a play on this fry culture. But I would like to say that we have made a great video about Scottish cuisine and Scottish food about 2 years ago, and if you're interested in this topic, you have to go back and check that out, because we talked in that video about all the amazing seafood and, you know, oats and oat cakes and the great comforting stews and hearty soups and all of that. And yeah, Scottish cuisine can be healthy. It definitely, you know, there's a lot of freshness to Scottish cuisine. It's not all just fried. I think that the fried food is kind of a night out treat. And honestly, what cuisine doesn't fry foods? You know, food doesn't have to have some sort of moral, you know, quality to it. Some foods are fried and some aren't. How come that Japanese people get away with having tempura and everyone's like, oh, this is so posh, and then Scottish people make fish supper and suddenly that's super bad for you? That's double standard. Number 3, the typical Scot is ginger or redheaded. I can say ginger because I'm redheaded myself, but you know, sometimes ginger has kind of not the greatest connotation. Here in Britain there's quite a lot of gingerism, gingers are just not being treated right. Mean! I don't like it. Anyway, let's get back to the actual debunking part. No. When you arrive in Scotland, you will definitely notice more redheaded people than likely in your own country, unless you're from Ireland, then it's probably very similar. Only about 6% of Scottish people are naturally redheaded, and Edinburgh is actually the place with the highest concentration of redheadedness. But from my point of view, you know, being here for 10 years, I would say that like the typical look for a Scottish man would be quite dark hair, kind of like dark brown hair with a bit of like golden or red undertone to it, and a red beard, and quite, you know, light-skinned, obviously, because we don't have sun. We do have sun, but it's just always kind of low, and it's just not doing much really. Which gets me to the next myth that needs to be busted, which is it always rains. This one I keep hearing from my family members and from my friends. It's, you know, such a popular thing to ask me. Maybe it's just them trying to do small talk. I get it. It's always, you know, oh, you've been there for 10 years. That must kind of suck, like it rains all the time. Like, how do you deal with all the rain? And even people on Instagram were asking me this, not just when I ask them like what myths do need to be debunked, but even like normally when they start a conversation, they often say like, ooh, I'm really thinking about moving to Scotland, but I'm really worried about the weather. Like, is it really raining all the time? No, it's not. Actually, here on the East Coast, which includes places like Edinburgh and Aberdeen, the total rainfall in an average year is less than in places like New York City or Barcelona. That's data for you. That's the stats, the hard numbers. However, it is really windy, like all the time. Like if you don't like wind, then this is gonna be a deal breaker for you. Also, the weather changes a lot. So I think that the actual, like on paper, it looks like there's not that much rain, but I would say that in real life that translates into there's always like a super tiny bit of rain. Like every day it's gonna be like a teensy bit rainy. But there's almost never like a monsoon style rain. So like you, it's kind of funny because I would say that umbrellas are not actually a thing here on the East Coast. Because most people will know that if you buy an umbrella, it's like a really bad investment because the wind is gonna ruin it like straight away. And the rain tends to be so light that you almost feel a bit stupid. You know, you feel a bit dumb having an umbrella because nobody else has one, and you're like, am I really that soft? Oh, I need to scot up. No umbrellas for me. Just buy something with a hood on it and you're fine. Next up, there's only one Scottish accent. Ha! Yes, so thinking this is similar to if you came to Italy and the only pasta you ever knew existed was like mac and cheese. And then you come to Italy and suddenly the pasta comes in shapes of like baby turtles and Ferris wheels. It's Scotland not only has a different accent for every area, but there's also a different accent for basically every like social circle or like social level. I don't want that to sound bad because obviously like no one accent is better than the other, but definitely some of them are easier to understand than others. To give you like personal context of it, for me it's really easy to understand the accent in which all of Simon's friends speak because like I don't even hear it anymore. It's that to me is just like the standard like baseline. But I will still struggle with like, you know, cabbies or maybe bus drivers, which is, you know, nothing against cabbies and bus drivers. It's just that often a cabbie will talk at you through the intercom. So not only they have a thick accent, but also like the quality of the conversation, like the technical quality of the conversation is not quite great, so that is something that I don't always feel comfortable with because sometimes I just don't understand, and that's something that you just have to be prepared for, that if you're moving to Scotland there will always be some accents that you will just not learn to be comfortable with. That's just it. Next myth, or at least partially myth, Glasgow is dangerous. Okay, so Glasgow has been called Europe's murder capital before, that is true, and it was based on some data. So yeah, on paper it sounds kind of scary. So, you know, you will, when you go online and, you know, when you look into like what are some misconceptions people have about Scotland and Glasgow, you know, this is kind of like the top one. Like people will ask other people, is Glasgow safe to go? Is Glasgow safe to visit? What if I travel alone? Like, are there places that I should just avoid? And Honestly, most of the crime in Glasgow is very gang related, so unless you're going to Glasgow to be a part of a gang, then you will probably be totally fine. Also, I think that Glasgow needs to be appreciated for the effort that they have been making, because in the past 10 years their knife crime rate actually went down by 60%, which is massive. And now even places like London are trying to kind of learn a lesson from how Glasgow did it. So, you know, if you're still worried about the data and the numbers, it's much better now than it used to be, but personally I never felt in any sort of danger in Glasgow. Honestly, Edinburgh also has some parts that have a bit of an edge, or you know, like if you only watch Trainspotting before going to Edinburgh, maybe you will be worried even to go to Edinburgh. I don't know. But anyway, my point is that I think that Glasgow still fits that like European standard of safety. If you're an outsider, you're fine. You're safe. No worries. Now, Scottish distilleries mostly make whiskey. Obviously, they are the most famous for making whiskey, but in fact, there's more gin made than whiskey, and Scotland's gin actually accounts for 70% of all of UK's production of gin, which is massive. And I guess it kind of makes sense, because we already have all those distilleries for the whiskey, and the gear is basically very much the same to make both. But to make whiskey, first of all, it is very heavily regulated, and it also takes ages. I think that gin essentially takes months to make, and also the freedom that the distillers get with like the flavors and things like that. Honestly, whenever I read about this, you can tell how people who are distilling both whiskey and gin, like, you know, the whiskey thing, like that's very kind of traditional, like you're really like paying respects to the tradition of this country. With gin, you actually get to have a lot of fun. That's why when you come here, you're gonna see so many great, weird flavor of gin. Yeah, if you're a gin lover, consider this. Like, you don't only have to visit Scotland for the whiskey. We have a lot of gin, and it's great. Now, last one. All Scottish people hate all English people. Now, if that was true, then Simon probably wouldn't be here anymore. Neither would his dad and his brother, and I mean, his mom. Your mom counts as English too, right?
Very.
It's just like all of your family seems to be English in Scotland, so that seems to be working just fine. Maybe this myth just needs rephrasing. It's not that Scottish people hate the English. Scottish people hate being called English. That's for sure.
Yep.
Okay, I have a couple of honorable mentions here, one of which is that some people said that it should be debunked that Scottish people drink a lot, but they do!
Yep!
Like, again, like I've looked into the numbers and Scottish people are very much like up there. I think that you shouldn't come to Scotland expecting everyone's gonna drink with you. Actually, like among women, up to a third of all Scottish women just don't drink at all. In men, it's kind of more about like 15 to 20%. Also, there's these myths about kilt wearing. And I think that people will usually fall into like one of two groups, one of which is like believing that Scottish people just wear kilts all the time, and the other one is thinking like this is just like such a like an archaic thing, and Scottish people don't wear kilts ever. And neither of those is true. Like a kilt sort of ensemble is basically the same as like a suit. If you're going to a wedding, a lot of people will wear kilts. Also, you know, people will be saying like, oh, but like that whole myth about people not wearing underwear under kilts. I have been to weddings where some of our friends did not wear anything under their kilt. But the thing is, the kilt is heavy. I've never seen any of Simon's friends' utensils under their kilt.
I have.
Oh God. Well, there you go. So maybe there's like a weird kind of double-edged myth debunked for you. Okay, and we're done with all the myths that I wanted to cover in today's video. Now I want some ice cream, because in contrast to the stereotypes about our local weather, it is very sunny, it's not even windy today, it's perfect. I think I'm gonna go and grab a scoop from Mupai Gelato, which has recently reopened. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and sub, and also visit me on Instagram. Why not? It's KakiBot for my illustrations and KakiBlog for my photos of Edinburgh. Boop. Yay. Okay. Thank you again for watching. Big shout out to the watching until the end gang. And I will see you soon. Bye!